Hi, I'm Bruce Smith. Hopefully we have met by now. And this is the first installment in probably two installments on drawing with graphite. We're going to do a little still life work here. And I am the filmmaker and the narrator and the main character in this pitiful little show, so it might be kind of rough. Hang in there with me, okay? And let's get started. Okay, I'm working on the floor, and I have a photograph of two apples just sitting on a white plane here, and this is our source material. There are a couple of things that I want you to pay special attention to even before we get into the drawing about the source. One is that the apple in the foreground is larger than the apple sitting behind it. The two apples are roughly the same size in life, but things that are closest to you in the picture plane are going to be a little larger than things that move away from you in the picture plane. So I want attention paid to that. Another element that we need to pay some attention to is that apples are not round. And I'm going to do a little drawing on our handout, on our photograph here, to illustrate that. If you notice, there is some flatness to the top of that apple, and then some flatness to the side of the apple. So we're not using entirely curvilinear lines to draw the contour of the apple. So it's not an entirely round object. So if you can't draw a straight line or you can't draw a circle, you're in no trouble here. So, second thing I would like for you to pay some attention to is the composition or the placement of these two objects, the two apples. They're on a diagonal, so the diagonal is running this way. Foreground is a little closer, lower on the diagonal. Background object is a little higher on the diagonal. We're working with a 6B, pretty dark graphite pencil. We also have a blending stump here, also known as a tortillon, and a vinyl eraser. Working on paper. I think it's interesting to note where materials come from. The paper's from France. The eraser, oddly enough, is from Spain. And the pencil is from the UK. And I have no idea where the blending stump is manufactured. So it's just a rolled up piece of paper. When we start the drawing, we're going to start very, very lightly. All of our marks will be very light. That is so that in the event that you mess it up, as I probably will, you can go back in and take and erase and make some corrections very easily. So we're working very, very lightly initially. The first thing I'm going to do is lay in the composition line. I want to make sure that I get these things on the diagonal. So that's the diagonal running through the image, and we'll start placing our first object here, the apple, on the diagonal that we just put in. And notice that I am working very, very lightly, and it doesn't matter how many times I go out and make adjustments in this contour initially, because if I remain working very lightly, I can easily erase the contour lines that I don't like, and I can go back in later and strengthen the ones that I am happy with. So got the foreground apple placed in roughly. Go into the background apple. Notice that there is overlap in these two apples. This one is partially hidden behind the foreground apple. So we'll get that in. And it is slightly smaller than the one in the foreground. And it doesn't matter how many times you readjust your contour line as long as you're working lightly. As all of the lines that you don't like can be taken out easily with an eraser. That's where the stem enters the apple. And our first move here will be to decide which of these contour lines, which I have, maybe restatement of these contour lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5, which of them are the ones that I want to keep. And I'll go back in and strengthen those a little. So we're still working not very hard, but we are strengthening up our contour lines at this point. So and we'll begin to commit to a contour at this point. You don't want to commit too early. Goes for life and marriage and you name it. Don't commit too early. Okay. Now, it's not necessary, but if it makes you feel better, you can go back in and take out some of those stray contour line marks that we made, ones that you have decided not to keep, not to use, with your Spanish eraser. And in essence, that is our composition here, what we're going to work with. Now we'll start in with values. There's a value system here, some really very dark values over to the right-hand side of each object, and then lighter values to the left-hand side of each object. Our light source was in the upper left-hand side, coming down onto the two objects. So our deepest values are lying over here to the right-hand side, and that's where we're going to start the drawing to lay in the values. We're going to build values lightly, so there's not a lot of pressure on this pencil at this point. We're placing in the values on the darkest side of the apple, and we're going to build and build and build. And it is a good idea to shift directions in what you will call shading. Actually, artists don't use that word shading, they use the word value. We're laying in the deepest value here, so we're laying in the deepest value that runs all the way down over to left-hand side of this apple. We're not nearly as deep as we need to go with this eventually, but we're going to build it a little at a time. The reason for that is we don't want to score the paper. I don't want to mar the paper. I don't want to score the paper. And I'm hoping for something of a photographic appearance in this drawing in the end, something that looks very similar to our source material. So I don't want the pencil to score or leave impressions in the paper. Now we're going to move to the blending stop and push at this a little bit. You have to put a little pressure behind this, but you'll notice for one thing it's getting a little darker, and it aids in getting rid of the appearance actually of the tool that we were using, the pencil. So we're burnishing, and then moving out into an area where we actually haven't worked yet, but burnishing the area. Continue working on this left-hand edge over here. Let's use the pencil more on its side. I think that's going to move us along more quickly to place it on its side, and then there'll be a little less likelihood that I'm going to leave any score in the paper or any marks in the paper. Note that I'm not going very far with this. Initially I'm working in small areas, and then I am burnishing. Moving on across here, there is a lot of deep value on the face of this apple. It's working out pretty well to use this pencil on its side. For one thing, I'm covering more ground more quickly, and two, I don't seem to be scoring the paper as much, so let's stick with what works here. I'm always for whatever can be done rapidly should be done rapidly and efficiently, and this seems to be the most efficient approach here, so let's stick with it here. And this value, this kind of middle value that we're putting in here, makes its way all the way over to the other side of this apple. If I overwork one of these values on an area in this apple, you know, with a value that's a little too dark or something like that, I'm not going to really worry that much about it, because the eraser will pick it back up. It's very forgiving paper. The graphite's easily liftable, so I'm laying this in with the pencil laying very much down on its side, and then burnishing some more. We're going to work one object at a time rather than bring up both objects at once. So we're sticking with this foreground apple, and we're going to stick with these values. There's no absolute light of the paper except right up in here. So there's some value to all of this. Then we burnish some more. You don't actually know what sort of value you have on the paper until you burnish. So it is important to stop and burnish so that you can read the value on the paper. We're going to move back over to the right hand side. We have to go down pretty dark. These are some areas in this apple that are, you know, practically the absolute darkest that you can get out of this pencil. So over here we're going to start building. We'll build and build and build, hoping not to score the paper. Building. Darker and darker. I'm trying to be somewhat careful with that contour, that edge out there at this point. Kind of rolling the pencil some as I work in this darker area. And then we'll burnish some more. So stopping to burnish every few minutes here. Moving this value on over more. This is, by the way, one of the I suppose more tedious kinds of drawing methods that we'll get involved in this class. As we'll shift over to charcoal, and we'll shift into chalks, and we'll shift into some processes that are that move more quickly and aren't. I think of another word for that, but I'm just going to call it tedious, you know, because this is repetitive. You could be listening to music or something while you do this. I mean, I'm working in silence here so that, you know, my audio is okay with you guys, but you know, you could be have your headphones on and listening to your favorite band or something while you do this, because it is a tedious building, repetitive process. It's just the nature of it. I'm avoiding going too much down in here because there is a little bit of reflected light in that area. And we'll burnish some more. At some point in this process, your burnishing tool, your tortillon that I have in my hand, is going to begin to pick up a lot of graphite. And that graphite can be used in some areas where your values are a little lighter. So, you know, this tortillon's picked up a lot of graphite. We can put some of that in up here in the top of this apple, as we have some lighter values up in the top. This is not a as I said earlier, I'm working on the floor, actually, so that I can put a whole lot of pressure behind this burnishing tool, because it takes a lot of pressure for you to smooth this out. So there's a lot of pressure going in behind this burnishing tool here to get soft edges, softness from the dark to the light, dark to light. we're still not as dark as we should go over here, so we are going to continue to build. And it is this high distinction between the darks and the lights that is going to give this thing its photographic quality in the end, its photorealism. I started to put some music on in the background here, but you know, I think that I mean, I can't talk the whole time I'm doing this because I can't think of anything to say. It's we're just building up the darks here, so you know, we're working with the pencil to get these values as deep as we need them. But we're kind of working conservatively. I don't want to do too much at once. I don't want to overwork some area. But at the same time, trying to avoid making marks that are going to in some way score the paper so much that the pencil marks become too prevalent, too prominent in this. I don't actually want the pencil marks to become too prominent. And they're going to be here, but I don't want them emphasized. Keep working. I'm not as dark as this pencil will go yet. I'm making a concerted effort to shift the direction of these marks frequently, so that I don't establish some mark direction in here. Getting to look like something that I think will pass as an apple, right? All it has to do is pass as an apple. Do some more burnishing. Darker still.